How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Dead Jester Productions podcast. I'm your host, Josh or J Moskers. It's episode number 215. Joined this week by special guest Dave from the Echoplex Media. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Appreciate you stopping by. We've been chatting for a little bit before the show here. Had some technical difficulties as well, so what else is new? But yeah, thank you for being here. Why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself, what you have going on?
Yeah, we've been doing a podcast since 2015, and that sort of ballooned out into several podcasts. And sometime during the pandemic, I decided, since I had some money saved up from my last business, and because we kind of lost our lease on our warehouse, I was like, well, if I'm going to jump, now is the time. So I got rid of my overpriced apartment in Campbell, California, grabbed a room at a friend's house, and built out a studio in their garage. Now I'm somewhere else, but that's sort of the story as to how I came to be doing this in a more serious way. We mostly cover cults and high control groups and conspiracy communities, and sort of the intersection there, how conspiracy communities operate that way. But we also have shows about local Bay Area news and weekly news roundup, but it's more an analysis of how the media covers the news than it is just like me reading the headlines or whatever.
Yeah.
And then my co-host, the Media Wench, just started streaming Monday and Tuesday mornings at 9 a.m. Pacific, and she covers news out of Shasta County, California, which you would think, well, that's weird, but it's not weird, and the chat really loves it. So we're pretty stoked on that. Not everything we do goes out as a podcast. In fact, the vast majority of what we do is live only. Our podcasts are the Plex, which is our news roundup, Down Ballot, which is what it sounds like. It's a local news show. The Intellectual Dollar Tree, which is probably people would guess what that is, but it's like making fun of public intellectuals and people who think that they are just too smart for everybody. And then a show we don't do live is called How the Tech Are You, which is a tech show I do with a couple of my friends who are software engineers. And then a show that's on hiatus is a show called Local Love, where we were interviewing local musicians, but we ran out of local musicians to interview. So show's on hiatus. Plus the numbers on that weren't so great because it was hyper local. And if you weren't, a fan of the band or whatever, there's no reason to listen to it. So
Interesting. We got a lot going on over there. One of the things you mentioned was like a news show. And how long does it take you to produce an episode of that? Like the prep work and everything like that? Because
I'm doing prep on that all week, right? Because it's easier, right? Because I'm as they would say, extremely online. I have to be for the other stuff I'm covering, because I'm never going to find out about like little online cult groups or whatever if I don't encounter them. So as the week goes by, I'll see things on Twitter or Threads or Facebook, or just maybe from on my RSS reader, and so I toss all that kind of haphazardly on a Google Doc, and then the Sunday morning, I get up. We use the term morning loosely here. I get up and get coffee or breakfast or whatever, and I start organizing that document. And then after I'm done getting that organized, I'll go into my Discord and I'll check the Discord channel for that particular show and go through and see what other people in my community have found, and then just slot those things in. So it's kind of hard to gauge how much time I spend, because over the course of the week I'm just randomly copying links, but the better part of the afternoon Sunday, I suppose, I'm spending getting everything organized and making sure that if I end up having to actually talk about something, instead of just making fun of what the dumb newscaster said, that I know what I'm talking about. So I guess the day of the show, probably 4 to 6 hours of prep.
Oh, yeah. We had started putting together a news show. We were going to do it as like a podcast, or it was going to be like a weekly format one. And one of the things that really held me up on actually producing it then was the amount of time it took me to research topics. Like we were going to do like a roundup of like the weekly, news articles, so to speak, of like what the hot button issues were, and then focus on one in particular and make that the main story, and then that'd be the show. And we were looking at like 20 minutes maybe per episode, 25, 30 minutes maybe. And just getting all of the data put together would take me, I don't know, 5 hours or 6 hours or something. And that's not it's not that long, but it's 5 or 6 hours additional than what I would normally be doing. So I just didn't have the time, and I got really disappointed. It's yeah, I don't know. That
Yeah,
combined with
it
actually
used to be
recording it and making it
that
sound good.
that one used to be a lot harder until we got popular.
Mm,
And now, I mean, I could wake up sometimes because just how the week goes or whatever. Because I have so much else going on. Sometimes I'll wake up and I'll be like, "Shit, there's like 5 links here," and so I'll organize those links, try to figure out what's going on, see if any of them have any potential for me to talk a little bit longer. And I just
yeah.
jump into my Discord and I'm like, "Oh, this is great," because there's like 50 or 60 links from the people in the community about stuff they kind of want me to cover or whatever. Some of it's duplicates of the stuff I find, and some of it's
Mm,
duplicates of each other, because I always tell the people in my community, I'm like, even if you think I'm not going to use it, just throw it in there, because like I'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So
yeah.
on that show, it's like a big shout out to my Discord community. Anybody wants to join that, by the way, that's discord.me/echoplex. It's not like other political Discord servers either. People are not in there like arguing with each other. We don't put up with that bullshit. So
Fun. Yeah. I I'm hoping that once I'm able to make the jump to fully self-employed, I'll be able to do more fun stuff like that. Because that it just seems like a ton of fun, just being able to be more content creative as opposed to working.
well,
But
unfortunately, it then just becomes working. I don't mean to I don't mean to
no,
like burst your
I
bubble
do get
here.
that. No, I do get that. But like a lot of what I do now is more analytics driven, and like I work in marketing for reference. So it's like literally just sitting there reading data from like Google Analytics, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, just back end analytics from websites for businesses. And it's like, it's all right. It's cool. I like working with people. But at the same time, I'm like, man, how many times can I compile data into a spreadsheet and present it to somebody? I would much rather, like I said, I'd much rather be on the creative side of things of like, let's make content together. Like I get that it's work, but I can put more of a passion into it than entering information onto a spreadsheet.
I mean, I have to do some of that myself, right? I have to
Mhm.
like try to figure out
I
what
I don't
what's
hate
working and what's
spreadsheets.
not.
Yeah, it's the repetitive nature of it, I think, is the thing. I'm the type of person that needs to constantly be doing somewhat new things. If I'm doing the exact same thing over and over again, is when I get frustrated, I think.
Yeah, honestly, you're like, if I don't want to deal with looking through the metrics, I can fuck off the metrics for an entire month, and it doesn't really matter, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm not taking dramatic action based on metrics.
Yeah, I have a lot of people relying on me to manage their advertising money for them, so I can't just be like, whatever.
What is advertising money?
I, I I just use it as a general term of like
No, no,
they have. Oh, yeah,
yeah, I have zero ad budget.
yeah.
There's no way I could start dumping money into advertising right now.
It's I've worked with people all over the spectrum as far as like what their budget is, and you'd be surprised how similar a lot of like the setup is for their marketing. I mean, it's not Google functions the same way for everybody, right? Obviously, you're going to target people in a different way, but it's the same basic idea of like how to set it up, how to organize your advertising, everything like that. But man, people every time I talk to somebody, it's like having to start from scratch as though it's a new thing. It's like, all right, let's take it from the top. This is Google. People will find your business on here.
Yeah, for sure. That's the grind part that I don't
Mhm.
necessarily like, is the marketing. And as like I switched over to doing this full time, and kind of had to drop like some of the people that were involved in it, because the nature of the project had to change. I had to
Mhm.
get used to not only marketing the project but marketing myself, which
Mhm.
I was pretty uncomfortable with the concept at first.
It's strange, man.
But
Yeah,
now
it's
I'm going on everyone's podcast to market myself, so I'm doing fine, I guess.
I think part of it can depend too on like the way in which you're doing it. Like going on a podcast and chatting about like yourself and like your work, I feel is more comfortable than sitting down with like a client and being like, so anyway, here's my pitch. And it's like the face to face, like, this is it. This is my couple. I get in the grand scheme of things, it's basically the same thing, except here we're separated by computer monitors and the basis of it is talking about cults and conspiracies and things like that, which we haven't got into 10 and a half minutes into the episode.
That's fine. These
But
people can just wait.
yeah, yeah. Hold off, guys. Hold on. We're talking about other stuff here. Yeah, it's like it's how like when I got started in sales, in advertising sales, it was weird because like I didn't have something tangible to sell people. And so it's like I'm walking into a business like, hey, I'd like to sell you advertising. Oh, can you like show me, you know, how this will work and help me? And it's like I can show you how it will be implemented online, but I can't promise it'll even do anything for you. You know, I can promise you that people will see it, but if they click on it, will they come into your business or shop online? I don't know. I can't guarantee it. And so it's really weird to. It was just a really awful way to get introduced into a sales role.
So one of the only thing I do sort of outside of my own content is I have done some consulting for other streamers and podcasters.
Mhm.
And one of the things that shocks about half of the people is that when I tell them that the audience for my shows is actually not included when I'm helping them launch their show, right? Like that they're not going to be streaming to my channels, that they're
Yeah,
not going to be published on my website and stuff. People don't seem to like understand that that's not like a
that's
service that I'm
interesting.
willing to offer. I
Yeah,
had a guy get real mad at me actually. He's like, "What do you mean I can't stream on your channel?" I'm like, "I don't know you." I'm like, "My audience shows up there because they trust me. I'm offering you help with like
yeah.
technical stuff and branding and getting your merch shop
Mhm.
going. I'm not just plugging in my audience to content I
That's
don't
a
know
very
anything
easy
about."
way to like alienate your audience.
Right, right. To just
Just
basically be selling them off to some random dude
yeah,
who wants to talk to like uh, his 6 band members over and over and over again on your channel. Yeah, the audience is going to be like, "Well, I could certainly find something else to watch."
yeah. It's fascinating. Yeah, no, I've never had that happen at all.
Well, it's they do find me through seeing my work, right?
Mhm.
They check it out and they're like, "Oh, your chat is cracking." And it's like, "Yeah, but they're not for sale. They never agreed to any of this." I
There's that.
traumatize them enough with the content. I don't want to traumatize them by putting a brand new podcast on there by people who don't know what the fuck they're doing.
There's a client I work with who it's come to my attention that I don't think he realizes that he's basically trying to be like a data broker, but doesn't know it yet. And it's like everything he does is like, oh, I want to like set up ways to like have forms on my website so people can contact me and then we can use that. I don't know what we want to do with that data yet, but like we could utilize that maybe to contact them in the future or whatever. And everything he does is based around collecting as much data from potential customers as possible with no clear goal of like what to do with it. He sells, he has products to sell, but he's just obsessed with collecting data. I'm like, this guy is like one thought away from realizing, oh, I'd rather just be collecting data and selling it to people. It really seems to be right up his alley. And that's what I think of sometimes. Like with what you said is like when I hear this from people, it's like, you're selling your audience. Like that's what this guy wants to do is have an audience and sell it. He wants to
Yeah,
be
my merch provider
acceptable.
offers a bunch of that stuff, but luckily enough, it's opt in, and I'm like, I'm not trying to get like analytics of who's buying a T-shirt from me.
Yeah.
I just don't want to know. I have a general idea of what the demographics of my audience are, and that's
Mhm.
generally who buys my stuff, like from my web, like from our shop.
Yeah.
Shout out to Fourth Wall, by the way, for
Nice.
making that easy for me. But like I don't like the idea of doing that beyond like getting like very kind of rough and
Mhm.
almost surely inaccurate metrics on who's listening to my shows or who's watching my streams, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's scary the amount of people out there I wouldn't trust that are just willfully collecting data with no regard to the safety of the people involved that they're collecting it from. And then how willingly people provide information.
Yeah,
It's
it's funny because the nature of like our content, we end up pissing people off, right? And so somebody's like, "I'm gonna dox you," and I'm like, "You stupid motherfucker! My face is on stream, 35 hours a week. It would be like very trivial to find out who I am and like things about my background. I'm like, you go on, you go ahead and do that. You
yeah.
know,
Yeah. I've mentioned countless times on the podcast where I live, not my actual address, but like basically the town I live in. And you can gather up all my information relatively easily just by listening to the podcast.
Yeah,
Uh,
luckily enough, I've moved two times in as many years.
mhm,
Both times willingly, and the place I'm at now is great. But I mean, if somebody wanted to find my address, they'd probably find my address in Campbell from 2 years ago. Because even these data broker sites, they're not going to tend to be current, right?
mhm.
A group doxed me and tried to dox my address, and they doxed my address in Berkeley from when I was in college. I'm 47. So I was like, well, it sucks for the person who lives in that apartment now, but well, I didn't say anything. I acted all, astonished that they had doxed me instead of like telling them, "Oh, you idiot." I was like, well, whatever, you think you doxed me. I just hope whoever lives there didn't have any problems as a result of it, you know?
Yeah. I kind of, I'll use this to transition with the rise of like modern online groups that maybe hate groups is the wrong word for in this sense, but like people that will dox and things like that. Would you say they're more or less dangerous than offline groups slash cults, or is it a different style that maybe you can't compare it evenly to?
I think that to catch somebody's attention in real life, you got to do the things you got to do are a little bit more, to piss somebody off in real life, you got to actually piss them off, right? So
Mhm.
I think that it's sort of apples and oranges. It doesn't take much to piss somebody off online. I'm even working on that in myself. Like, I'm trying to be less easily pissed off on the internet myself because it's like if I'm trying to offer perspective or, you know, basically if I'm trying to offer perspective, my perspective is going to be skewed if I'm pissed off. But,
Mhm.
I think it's easier to piss people off online, but also I think that, they can't punch you in the face.
Yeah.
So I think the consequences and the potential end result of pissing someone off online is often very different. But it also depends on who you piss off and how many people they can rally around them.
Mhm.
Like I'm not worried about pissing off some random YouTuber, even with 100,000 followers who, talks about chemtrails. But if they had 2 million followers, maybe I should worry more about pissing them off. I don't know.
Mhm. Going back, you said about like not getting angry on the internet. Like, I don't want you to sit here and explain to me like the best ways to get you angry because I feel like that's just inviting trouble. But like, I'll put my personal perspective in. Like, I generally don't get upset at anything I see online. Or to be fair, like in person, the only thing that annoys me really in general is having my time wasted because it's a precious commodity. Uh, Why do you think people are so quick to get upset online in particular? Is it just
Well,
the anonymity? They're able to respond.
I think that it's going to shake out like entirely different in a lot of different cases. Like
Hmm.
what are you mad about? Are you just mad that somebody disagrees with you? Well, then I don't know. You're just some you're a very arrogant and self-centered person who thinks that everybody needs to agree with you, and that's a crazy
Hmm.
town. Are if Are you mad that someone is harassing you? Well, I guess that's a little bit different, right? I mean, sure you can block them, but if somebody really wants to harass you, blocking them on Twitter or whatever, just going to find your email address, or
Yeah.
find you on the Book of Faces, or what, Threads or Mastodon or whatever. And now you're spending all your time blocking this person, and I figure that's a pretty reasonable thing to be pissed off about. So it
Mm.
just sort of depends what it is. Or like, if I see someone, um, even if it's not aimed at me, I get pretty mad if I see people weaponizing their audiences,
I
in
see. Yeah.
in service of like harassing someone or a group of people. I'm like,
Mm.
what? I'm like, you know, you first of all, they're stupid, because if the platform they're on catches wind of it, they're likely to get kicked off, because that's against the terms of service of every platform except for like Rumble or BitChute or something, right? But those places
Mm.
are like the wild, wild west. And so like, it, it's all going to be situational. And I don't think people wake up in the morning and are like, you know what I want to do? I want to get pissed off on the internet today.
I think some people do that.
I guess so,
Like,
but I think a lot of times they're also trying to piss other people off.
yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's people who are looking to be upset so they can not necessarily sit on camera, but like the concept of like, I just want to sit here and complain and have a fit in order to get other people wound up and drive clicks, get views, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, if I
Like
think something's a
rage
real
bait
problem,
almost.
if I
Yeah.
think something's a real problem that's going on, like, you know, I will. You can tell how often I think something is a real problem that's going on, actually, because if you look at my blog, you could probably tell if I'm the one who wrote the article, and those are kind of few and far between. But otherwise, like, yeah, I'm not that mad. Sometimes I get mad on stream, but
Mm.
not like at my community, or like, you see other like streamers, they're like raging that the people in their community are like having some off-topic discussion or something like that. If I get mad on stream, it's usually just somebody that I've been observing for a while,
Mm.
and we've been kind of making fun of or whatever, and then they'll like take the next step, and the thing they're doing is like dangerous, or to
Mm.
themselves, to their
Yeah.
family, to other people around them. Or if they're starting to like harass random people, or so I get a little pissed off when I start
Mm.
noticing that, because I don't preview the content necessarily before we run it on stream, unless it's something where I'm concerned that the person might be using slurs or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's, because that's just some kind of energy I don't want to put out there in the world, so I do
Mm.
have to preview stuff. Sometimes people surprise me, and then I will get a little mad, but I don't stay mad or whatever. It's just like in the
Mm.
moment. I don't, I think that I think that I think that it's you have to understand, I guess, that the person on the other side of the screen, you don't know, does that person have any friends? Are they close with their family? Do they have hobbies and
Mm.
outlets? Or is this person simply found community online and doesn't have any real interests? And so they're going to be, well, I think the temperature then of their online community is going to be turned up in their own mind.
Mm. I was gonna say, I feel like too, in a lot of instances, they use extreme language for very mundane situations. You see it a lot. I don't want to get into politics specifically, but you see it a lot with political talk, where it's like, you know, especially the way they refer to like people in politics, people talking about like the current presidents or whatever, Trump, Biden, whatever. They'll call them like unhinged or senile or um, what is it, like some of the like uh, they fascism, social, whatever. They, not that those are extreme, that's extremely necessary, but I think my point gets across in that they go to the most extreme possible wording anytime anything comes up, and that kind of translates to a lot of things online where people immediately crank it up to 100, more for clickbait than anything, and to drive engagement, which I
Yeah,
think
I mean,
can in
it
turn
takes a lot for
incentivize anger.
me to describe something as like fascist, right? Like
Mhm.
it takes a lot, because
Yeah, the words
there's
get
just other
ruined.
there's just other more accurate terminology you can use. And
Yeah, like
fascist
something I don't particularly agree with is what most people should be saying.
or if
Yeah,
if someone is you know authoritarian, or is
for sure.
engaged in like um, sort of very strong and very manipulative in-group, out-group sort of talk about this or that. I like to frame things that way. People can draw their own conclusions as far as whether or not, you know, the individual may or may not be a fascist. Now, my chat, it's kind of lit up with extreme language or whatever, but I generally ignore that. Or if people are getting a little too much, I'm like, hey, could y'all turn the temperature down a little bit here? We are trying to have a bit of fun, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm like, you
Yeah, I
know,
think
I just tell them, I'm like, you know, other people that are consuming this content are going to see the chat overlay, and they're going to see what you're saying in my chat.
just going
So,
absolutely ballistic while you're trying to have a rational conversation.
not necessarily that. I just,
No,
but
okay.
and it's rare. It's rare. You know, I'm really generally pretty happy with the community around me, and my mods generally take care of that before I have to, so that I can just focus on what I'm doing. So that's really good, because I don't want to spend time policing my chat. Like,
Has your chat ever tried to gaslight you into something? We've had it's different content. I get it. My chat would actively try and convince me that I've missed something or that like I misspoke and things like that, and we'd go back and forth on things like that. I feel like there's a lot of instances where my chat was actively against me, not in a hurtful way, but just in a fun sort of way. I don't know if you deal with that in your chat, but
I'm a little crazy, so you can't really gaslight somebody if they're crazy. Uh, can't you don't It doesn't take a lot of people convincing for the chat to convince me that I'm crazy. So
there's a lot of times where they try and convince me that the stream was like blank, that they couldn't see anything, and I'd be like, it's up on my end, I can see it. And they're like, no, it's definitely down. It's down. And when you have like 80, 100 people like telling you that at the same time, it's like, I don't believe you, but do I ignore everyone?
so
It's a
I that kind of stuff, I don't think my chat does that, and
yeah.
primarily it's because there's a few people there. There's like not even just a few, like a non-insignificant number of the people there are interested enough in like the content and the
Mhm.
stuff that's going on, that they have no there's no there's nothing in it for them
Yeah.
to like to do stuff like that. And if like randos come in and are like, oh, your audio is bad, I'm like, you were wrong. That is, you are absolutely wrong. My audio is not bad. I'm like, that is the one thing that is not true, unless something is incredibly broken, but I would notice that on my own. No, they don't mutiny on me.
Yeah.
You know, every once in a while it gets late and I've had a few drinks or whatever, and I start talking about something and I'm just like kind of off base, and instead of like doing that, it's just like my Dave in the chat. It's like, hey dude, hey, what are you doing? But that's more like, you know, and it happens less and less.
Mhm.
But you know, during the pandemic, maybe I was you know, consuming a little too much alcohol on stream, and that would happen more and more. In fact, they you know, they started instead of Gay Dave, they started referring to me as Gay Steve if I'd get trashed. I don't know where that came from, but now there's like somebody even made an emote if like bold letters as Gay Steve over like a pint glass that's clearly full of alcohol. It's like an emote in my chat now. So yeah, they don't. The people in my community don't mess with me too much, and if they
Mhm.
do, it's funny. It's like inside
Yeah.
jokes, you know. The stuff we talk about is pretty serious and
Mhm.
oftentimes disturbing. But the flip side of that is that, though, while I, you know, care about the things we're talking about and that they are important, we can't have a community where I'm taking myself like deadly seriously and
Yeah.
everybody's deadly serious all the time, because it would just be a dreary fucking place to hang out,
Mhm.
right? Like, so you know, the the community and the stuff that's sort of like, I guess, a ring outside of the content all has to be kind of nice for
Yeah.
the inner ring to be you know, watching people,
Mhm.
you know, destroy their own lives, fuck their families up, you know, have negative impacts on their community, be it in real life or online and whatnot. If we're covering that kind of stuff, you know, the community has to be pretty pretty chill and cool, or it's just going to be like an awful place to hang out. Nobody's gonna want to be there, and nobody's gonna take me like seriously in the sort of more journalistic or academic space that covers our unfolding dystopia.
Yeah. Speaking of which, sort of. So, what actually got you into covering these sort of online groups and cults and things like that? Was like, were you streaming before you did this, or was this like one of the catalysts of the streaming?
Well, the podcast came first, and it wasn't about any of this stuff, right? The news podcast was first. It was me and a friend. We're like, well, we should probably do a podcast because we are probably annoying our friends. So we could maybe get it all out on Sunday. And so we started doing that, and you know, as time went on, I started to realize that there was going to be a ceiling, as far as just putting out like an audio only podcast, and that I had to do something to like, keep increasing the size of the audience. And there were a couple options. Starting some new shows sort of helped, but that was kind of all over the place. And I made some mistakes, letting friends start shows that they weren't taking very seriously, or,
I've had that happen.
or they would not even be like the slightest bit mindful of things like copyright. And I'd be like, no, you can't actually run a movie trailer. I'm like, you'd think that
Can
you
we
could
just watch the entirety of I Am Legend on stream? Probably
well,
not.
this was audio only, but still, I was like, you'd think that you could run a movie trailer because it's advertisement, but the movie studios don't like that. They would like to control where their movie trailer is running. That's why they have an advertising department. You are not their advertising department. So yeah, we just the the focus changed essentially. People talk about audience capture a lot, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily the reason the focus changed, but I did see once we got to Twitch and kind of, got our feet down, and I figured out who was going to be like okay on camera, and who was going to, not necessarily take it hyper seriously, but show up on time. Because it was before the pandemic, so we were doing it all in person. Once that kind of got figured out and we got a few people who were kind of interested in what we were doing, we noticed that the content basically after the podcast recording on Sunday, where we'd touch on things like we'd talk a lot about the chemtrails community and kind of make fun of them, freaking out and fighting with each other. Or, there was this incident where the Scientology boat, the Free Winds, everyone on it had measles and they couldn't find a place to dock because of, because, if you worship a space alien, it's going to solve all your problems. Why vaccinate your kids? And that kind of stuff started to like, it wouldn't necessarily be driving viewers, but it would be driving engagement. And, we didn't come to covering those things because of the engagement. We were already interested in those things. The conspiracy theories have always been interesting to me, not in like I'm going to debunk your conspiracy theory. That there's plenty of people out there who do that, and I don't want to suggest that they're doing bad work. They're doing great work, especially when you see what I cover, which is the sort of sociological and societal things that happen where people's families stop talking to them. They lose their jobs. They can't get along with their neighbors because they just can't shut the fuck up about the flat earth is like the most ridiculous one, but there's other there's other stuff. And so that that became the thing that people wanted, and it was essentially paywalled, which was annoying some people. And it didn't bother me because they'd be willing to pay for that content, the content after the show that went out as a podcast. But there was a moment when during the post game, there were the women that were on my show were just they were just like, I'm firing all these people. And it wasn't like the Scientology stuff or the conspiracy stuff. We were covering the so-called intellectual dark web. And the women were like, I'm firing all these people. If you play another Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson or Brett Weinstein clip, I'm never coming on your show again. It was a funny moment, like during the show, like the chat was like dying. Like everybody thought it, we had a much smaller chat there then. Most of those people have actually stuck around, but they thought it was pretty funny. But then that was like a key moment where I realized I'm like, okay, this particular thing probably needs to get spun off. And so we spun off the Intellectual Dollar Tree as its own podcast, and me and two of my other frequent co-hosts who were interested in that stuff, because we kind of came out of like new atheism in the skeptic community and were sort of disenchanted by what it turned into, ended up doing that. And that then became the model for our other stuff. We spun off a live stream on Thursday nights about cults and the satanic panic, because it was just, we couldn't keep cramming all this stuff into this one big show on Sunday, because it was too disjointed and there was just too much to go over. And so that's sort of how that worked. And then one of our people, one of my co-hosts for one of my shows is also very interested in like local news. And so he'd put some local stories at the beginning of the podcast on Sunday. Well, all of a sudden we're 45 minutes in and we're still talking about what's going on with the mayor of San Jose. And I'm like, we need to spin this off. And so that's just sort of how it all, everything kind of got spun off of the main show. We don't do a lot of conspiracy stuff on the Sunday show anymore. We'll do some of it, it's now just me on Sunday because I spun off all the shows and lost all my co-hosts to the spin-offs, I suppose. But so we have Conspiracy Bingo on Friday that got spun off of that, so we can take like a deeper dive, or some wackadoodle puts out what they think is a documentary and we can watch the whole thing on stream and kind of go over what's going on in the documentary. And so that stuff, it all just kind of spun out from that. And most of the stuff getting spun out was not regular, but rather, sporadic when we had time. And then the pandemic hit, and then I was stuck at home. And so all that stuff became regular. It wasn't that we weren't interested in that, or that I wasn't interested in that stuff to begin with. It's that I didn't think that's what the show was going to be about.
Okay.
And the Sunday show still isn't about that, but that's not, that is not our sometimes it's our most popular live night, but on the podcast metrics, it is not the most popular podcast. The Intellectual Dollar Tree is sometimes hundreds of times more viewers, or even thousands of times more viewers than the news show.
Nice. Do you have a favorite topic that you've covered, like an online group or something like that? Like, not necessarily like I guess like the most entertaining from your perspective, maybe.
Oh, the chemtrails community.
The chemtrails community.
Oh, absolutely. Because they all hate each other.
Can you provide some background on why they hate each other? I've not heard that side of it.
So I'm actually working on an article about another community right now, but I don't want to spill the beans on what that's about too much. But I'm seeing the same dynamic play out. What happened, as far as I can tell, is that community was, the chemtrails community was, I think most of these people believe it, but I also think it was a clout chase. And I use it as was because it's a shadow, a shell of its former self. So my take, and I'm still like working through it in my head, but I think what happened was like the QAnon meta conspiracy sort of took over in 2017 and 2018. And most of these chemtrails people just wanted to keep doing chemtrails. But the problem is the people that were following them, giving them money on Patreon or whatever they were doing, just got scooped up by these crazy people who want to talk about the tunnel children under the Getty or whatever, because that's a lot sexier than the lines in the sky, right? These are tunnel children under the Getty Museum. Completely wackadoodle, but that's more inflammatory. So they were all fighting over a chunk of a pie that kept shrinking. And so the community turned in on itself, and they all ended up essentially blaming each other or their views going away, or their, you know, their Patreon shrinking, or just their popularity starting to wane. And it's, you know, oh, you're gatekeeping me by not having me on your show regularly, or all this stuff. And it was just amazing. As this started to unfold, me and my co-host, known as the Media Wench, which Twitch actually has a hard time with on auto mod, we had to assure them that this is with love. She used to call herself the bar wench when we would throw house parties, because she would never let you make your own drink. Wonderful host of parties and wonderful co-host for some of my shows. But we, during all this, like as this was unfolding, there was a chemtrail conference, and I'm using the word conference. We use this very loosely, up in Portland. So we were like, well, these people might brawl, so we have to go. So we went up there, and they didn't brawl. The chemtrail conference was incredibly boring, but we met some other like people who were involved in the, I guess I'd call it the conspiracy critique space. Although these people are, the chemtrail people would call them trolls, and I wouldn't disagree necessarily, because they have been trolling the chemtrail community for quite some time. And I think the interpersonal stuff in these communities, I saw it unfolding, and I knew what was happening, like at the very beginning, because I had seen it happen previously. I'd seen it happen in the like new atheist and skeptic community, where, you know, you can only debunk Jesus so many times before people don't care anymore that you've debunked Jesus, right? Like, so if you're only focused on an individual issue and there's nothing else, well, now you're in this community where you don't even really know the people, and so you might actually hate these people. It's just that you don't know it, because you found out that they
don't want to debunk it as hard as you do, or vice versa.
Or again, it's just an a clout chase, a struggle for a piece of a constantly shrinking pie. And so they're just going to turn in on each other, because what else are they going to do? Nothing to report on, because nothing's happening. So I guess just start reporting on each other. And that's, you know, it's a pattern. The flat earth community did the same thing, but we weren't that interested in the flat earth community. That was just absolutely ridiculous. We interviewed a few flat earthers, but we just mostly did it as a goof. We weren't like, we weren't, you know, the only interesting flat earth interview, one of my former co-hosts, he moved up to Seattle, and, you know, doesn't have time really or the technical knowledge to be joining live in high quality. He got the guy to say that it's the flat earth is a result of interdimensional space beings that want to hide the existence of God from everybody. And that was pretty good. But we were like, well, that's the winner. We're done with these people. So, but we've watched this happen over and over and over again in communities. We watched it happen to some extent, even on what people like when Twitch sort of opened up the politics category. We watched a huge clout chase happen, and people definitely turned on each other who were otherwise, they're not friends. They don't know each other, but they were, fairly collegiate, and we're working together on stuff. And as soon as that politics thing, the politics category opened, I don't even know. It like didn't really change the dynamic of anything. Just changing the name of your stream from just chatting to politics doesn't really change anything. But man, oh man, did these people start? It turned in on each other. You started having people making like tier lists of the new politics category, and
when it affects the bottom dollar sort of thing.
So people started getting mad about that. Yeah, people started getting mad about that, and then somebody got mad at us because we got S-tiered by somebody, and the only reason we got S-tiered was they were like, "This shit you're doing about the satanic panic is fascinating, and that's why I've S-tiered you. You're the only one on the S tier. The rest of they're like the rest of these people. The rest of these people are just talking. The rest of these people are just talking about gun control, and I could give a fuck." And I was like, great. But then somebody got mad at us. They're like, well, you got S-tiered, blah, blah, blah. That you must feel really good. And I'm like, the person who did that has 500 followers on Twitter. I don't care. I'm like, I just thought it was funny that we got S-tiered among above channels that have a bigger viewership than we do on Twitch. I'm like, get a fucking hold of yourself. And so that's why when we end up following a community or getting interested in a community, it's almost always because of the dynamics between the creators and the just absolutely bonkers shit these people will do to try to like maintain a hold on their viewership, or even just to try to stop someone else from stealing their viewers. That's like it's amazing, because
Sort of
again,
like if I can't have them, nobody can have them sort of dynamic.
yeah, and again, like
Yeah.
I mean, there's no point in me continuing to explain to people that the trails you see behind planes are just ice crystals, right? Like that's not that fun. But you know, examining the cast of characters that are involved in this and watching as they lose, I hate to even call it the plot, but watching as they like lose their focus and turn inward has been a lot of fun for us. But it's not like, haha, these people are making fun of each other. It's like we have some insight into this, and we do talk about why this happens, and it's usually because there's no there, and so the thing that they were fighting against didn't really exist in the first place in many of these cases, or did exist, but now there's nothing left to fight against. And so it's like, all they really were in it for, they didn't really care about spreading information. What they wanted was the fight. And in the case of conspiracy theorists, it's a lot of times like fights against the Illuminati, or unfortunately the Jews, right?
Mhm.
And now, well, now there's nobody to listen to you. So I guess now your fight is against the guy who runs the website called Weather Modification History for whatever reason. I guess you hate him. I don't like him. He's an idiot, but I don't. If I go after him, it's because of the ridiculous things he's saying about the HARP array in Alaska, not that he stole my viewers.
What are your thoughts of like when some of these more fringe groups become more mainstream? You mentioned like, I mean, this is not the same as like the chemtrails people, but like going after Jewish people, for example, in the last, however long since the conflict going on over there has been going on, like it's definitely picked up in the recent months, the last couple of years or so as well. Like more of these fringe groups are now joining in, so to speak, on the popular discourse. Have you
So
noticed that with some of these other fringe groups, maybe, or maybe I'm off basis here?
I don't think anti-Semitism is on the rise. I think the
Mm,
definition of anti-Semitism has unfortunately expanded to include the
sure.
criticism of a nation state. In in I don't mean that that definition is literally expanded, but I mean in the discourse it seems to have expanded to
I think my
include
point.
criticism
So
of a nation state.
I just meant like I think it's come more into the public eye, like a focus,
Oh yeah,
just because of current events, is what I was trying to say. I think I explained it poorly,
yeah,
but
but
like I
also like QAnon was really big in like
that
2020, and
that's what I was going to mention. Yeah,
at
yeah.
the bottom of that rabbit hole is like the protocols of the elders of Zion, or it's the who do you suppose they think are trafficking the children in the tunnels? It's Hollywood or the bankers, and those are always proxies for the Jews.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, Q is the last like major one that was brought to my attention, partially because I'm not as invested in politics as some people, or just online conspiracies and things like that. I just don't have time for it. But like the fact that it was a thing coming across in like my news feed, I was like, oh, this must be something that there's at least a sizable audience for. I don't know if that was the is, is that even still going on? Like the QAnon push, I feel like it's fallen out of vogue, so to speak.
Well, these things, they have a certain life cycle. Like
Before
it's
they,
not, you have less people posting this where we go one, we go all crap, and having it be particularly and specifically about QAnon. But the residue is basically permeating the discourse.
it's just
Um,
fractured into separate groups, maybe now.
or just the the parts of it that people can use in a way that they think seem palatable
Mm,
has you know has entered a lot of spaces that the crazier stuff never would have been able to
I
enter.
see.
So for example, you know the moral panic around child trafficking and satanic ritual abuse, which
Mhm.
we've seen this before. I mean, I've seen this
Sure.
before. I'm a child of the '80s. This was all happening in the 1980s around heavy
Yes,
metal
Dungeons
music.
and Dragons is a satanic ritual.
Yeah. That's and Pizzagate and QAnon were
Mhm.
basically pulled out of the residue from that.
Mm.
Um, I mean, not always one to one directly, and I think that it's these things are always a little more complicated than that. But so it stands to reason that the residue of QAnon and Pizzagate are gonna just kind of fucking stick to everything for a while, and so now we have everybody. I don't think that for example, that the moral panic around the idea that people who queer people or people who are friends with queer people or teachers who want to teach sex ed and include information about like queer people. I don't think the idea that those people were grooming your kids would have caught on in such a
Mm.
real and oftentimes terrifying way if Pizzagate and QAnon hadn't captured the attention of so many conspiracy theorists.
I see. Yeah, that does seem to be the go-to. I don't know if insult's the right word, but it's definitely the go-to accusation of the day. It seems at times is groomer or pedo of sorts. Like if you, I mentioned earlier, like the extreme language people use, like that's I guess a decent example of it is like referring to people as pedophiles or groomers, especially politicians. Seems to be a common thread
and
currently.
and it really sucks in a way because there are like in the content creation space, there are people who have young audiences who are, in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, behaving inappropriately, talking, having private conversations with like young members of their audiences in ways that are, troubling.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is now that this thing is a moral panic, when something when something like that happens, that person can just brush it off as part of this larger moral panic and maybe kind of
I see.
get away with some inappropriate behavior.
It kind of diminishes the weight of the accusation.
Or I'm not sure that necessarily that all the time that it rises to the level of abuse or abuse of
Mm-hmm.
minors or whatever. But yeah, it's sort of if you're if you're having too many flirty conversations with people who are significantly younger than you
Mm-hmm.
and you're their favorite content creator, you're that's a problem. There's an
Mm-hmm.
asymmetry of power there, and you might be able to persuade people to, for example, send you nude photos they may not otherwise have sent you. And with this, like the ooze of like QAnon in the background, sort of leading to this, everybody's calling everybody a groomer, or
I see.
people
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that child trafficking is happening at the fucking daycare center and
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Well, now if somebody at the daycare center is actually hurting someone, people are going to be like, oh, everybody says that about everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what is that movie? The Incredibles. I think there's a line in that movie. That's it. I forget when that movie came out, but I think there's a line where it's like if everybody's a superhero, then nobody is. I think is what he says. Something along those lines.
Yeah, this would be the inverse of that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's it's not surprising that for example, the Satanic Panic in the 80s, it targeted basically goth kids and like nerdy kids who wanted to play Dungeons and Dragons because they were nerds, and fucking totally fine with me, whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
it just seems like these things, they always end up targeting the people who are vulnerable. Like nerdy kids in the 80s were vulnerable. They were getting picked on, stuffed in lockers. I mean, I know that getting stuffed in a locker was probably pretty rare, or getting a swirly was pretty rare. But
Mm-hmm.
it always ends up going after, people without power, even though the people engaged in the rhetoric would tell you that they're going after the powerful. That's not how it like plays out.
Mm-hmm. Were lockers? This is a weird question. Were lockers bigger before I went to school? I could not fit. I'm a thin guy. I was thin, super thin when I was in high school. There was a point where we actively tried to get into a locker, and it just couldn't happen.
Yeah, I don't think I don't know, everything, what do they call it? Shrinkflation. Maybe there's
Mm-mm.
shrinkflation of lockers, and maybe in the the 70s or the 80s, your locker was bigger and you could like hang your coat in
I
it or something. But
kind of remember that being like a like, oh, people get stuffed in like a trope in like movies and things like that even. And like growing up, and I was like, I can't even purposefully fit into a locker if I wanted to. Like we even had bigger like the ones we had in our gym in the locker room were like big square ones. Couldn't fit in those either. Like we at no point in my high school career, shall we call it, was I ever concerned about being shoved into a locker because I knew it wasn't possible. The sorely
so,
thing never happened, but I can see how that. I mean, it's at least possible.
well, I think it, you use the word trope. I think it's a trope. I think it's like,
Yeah.
for example, like somebody in my chat might say that I wouldn't say. Like if we run a clip of Ben Shapiro, they're like, "Oh, that's just, nobody ever stuffed him in a locker and that's why he's the way it is or whatever." And I'm
Mm.
like, "Well, I wouldn't stuff Ben Shapiro in a locker." But it's like, it's a trope. It's basically a way of saying that somebody's like a nerd or whatever.
Mm.
And
For sure.
um yeah, but again, it's not surprising. Like, for example, that the groomer panic is playing out in the way it is, where, you know, teachers who are themselves queer or are, teaching about queer, subjects about queer people are the ones who are targeted with this. It, comes as no surprise.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. No, I don't know. It's just something that I always thought of when we were in school. I was like, this is just not feasible. Going back to the actual topics at hand, do you see, is there a particular online group or something adjacent that you can see possibly becoming more mainstream? Not necessarily like wildly popular, but coming more to the forefront than they are now?
It's always surprising what comes forward, because when I first heard about QAnon, I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
I had no idea. I had no idea what was coming. And I think that's actually one of the things Q said or whatever. Nobody knows what's coming or some
Mhm.
ominous shit like that. I forget the exact wording. No, that's the thing about this stuff is you just never know. Like,
Mm.
I'd heard about, I think flat earth was really big in like 2012 through 2014, maybe
Mm.
2015. And, I'd seen it starting to bubble up online a little bit before that. And I was like, there's no fucking way. I didn't even think about like whether or not it was going to get big. I'm like, what do you do? Why are you posting about this? And then all
Do you
of a
think the
sudden it didn't get,
ridiculousness helps drive attention to it probably and gets more engagement?
yeah, I don't know the mechanism. Like if I knew the mechanism by which these things happen, I might be able to be more effective in
Mm.
helping put the brakes on some of this stuff. But it just seems like things, where did the satanic panic come from? Sure, like all people were always afraid of the devil and shit, but like,
Mm.
when the devil was depicted in cartoons from, if you saw the devil depicted in like and I'm not sure if it was even depicted in Looney Tunes or whatever, but it would be like a silly guy in a red suit, right? It
Yeah.
wasn't this ominous, terrifying thing that was coming to fucking traffic your children via a tunnel under a daycare center or whatever. It was like a silly-ish depiction. So I don't know. I don't know how our, cultural idea about the devil or about Satanism, for example, became what it became in the late 70s through the early 90s. These things kind of have a life of their own, and it's once the trajectory has started, I guess it's kind of easy to see where it's going if you're looking for it. But the
Mhm.
problem is it's the knowing to look for it at the beginning with any particular movement. And it's, how would you determine it? Because there's just all kind of crazy. Like, how do you know what crazy is about to catch on?
Yeah, it like you mentioned, it's very unexpected at times where it's like, where did they even come up with this? Why is this something people have latched on to? It seems like you said, it just kind of comes out of nowhere. It doesn't make sense why that's what people latched on to, but they do. Side note, I looked up, this is a bad example. I looked up Looney Tunes Devil, which is a terrible idea because all I get is the Tasmanian Devil.
Oh, I love the Tasmanian devil.
Yeah. But I did see one. It looks like their version of the devil is just a hairy red goblin looking guy. I don't know how else to explain it. Very standard devil.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, like a cartoon
It's,
devil. And
other
I
than that,
think,
it's all Tasmanian devil.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you could go, I guess, minus Tasmanian, but then like
Yeah.
then you start looking up devil or Satan and stuff. And then you start finding some shit that you wish you didn't see, probably. So,
But yeah, no, it's weird. It's really weird. I mean, I feel like too part of it is they'll latch on to current trends or like news and use that and bring it back to their uh group. Like they had, what was it, like a month ago or so, maybe, I forget, where they had the tunnels in New York that was in the news. I mean, how quickly they latched on to all these weird conspiracies about it and what was going on. And it kind of drowns out the actual discourse surrounding it at times, where it's like, if I'm trying to figure out like what the truth of a situation is, you have to wade through a lot of nonsense to try and figure out what actually is happening.
and in that case, you shouldn't be building tunnels
Yeah.
under a city. It's
This is also
dangerous.
true.
Like you can't, like you can, but like, to like, there's like a whole permitting process if you want to
Yeah.
build anything subterranean. Like you,
See, this is the practical response to it, and I can appreciate this.
well, yeah, don't dig
Yeah.
tunnels under your building because you're gonna die.
This is
Like,
this is not the response anyone had. At least in my, like, when I was looking up trying to find an answer for what was going on, it was all, they were like sacrifices, they were having
yeah.
like orgies or whatever. I'm just like, okay, but
So
what's going on here?
so I can give you a bit of a history of the tunnels starting from the
Mhm,
80s. There was a case called the McMartin Preschool where through maybe something happened there or whatever, where some kid was abused. I don't know, but it became a moral panic where now the whole enterprise of this preschool was there specifically to abuse children, and people were, uh, arrested and put in jail, during their trial, and every last one of them was acquitted or the charges was dropped. But one of the claims was that there were tunnels
mhm,
under the McMartin preschool that I don't know where the fuck they were taking the kids, right? Maybe the Scientology center. Who knows? I guess
yeah,
people weren't afraid of Scientology at the time, or people weren't aware of what the cult of Scientology was doing. They were just fucking, people were like, oh, those are weirdos who worship a space alien, which is true, but that's not the extent of what's going on over there.
mhm,
Um, so then, when Pizzagate came up, if you notice again, one of the claims that there was some subterranean structure
mhm,
under a pizza joint
mhm.
where, I don't know, Hillary Clinton was eating babies' faces or whatever. I forget that, the number
The
of
usual.
claims.
Yeah.
But then that guy went in there looking for the basement and
Mhm,
like, with a firearm. Thankfully, he fucking didn't shoot anybody. And but then that was the claim. And then the QAnon people, they had this whole thing about the tunnel children.
yeah.
And one of the claims is that there's tunnels under the Getty Museum where there's like an entire civilization, and one of the things they do down there is abuse children. And then now, these fucking weirdos are building tunnels that are not up to code, which again is dangerous and stupid. But of course, it's got to be to fucking hurt children. I guess like the only thing there is to do subterranean is to have child sacrifice. I don't know. I mean, I've been to raves in basements. I thought maybe that was what basements were for, but here all this time, nope. That rave in the basement was just to throw the cops off the scent because that was actually they were doing a sacrifice Monday through Thursday there.
Mhm. Yeah, there's you never really hear about tunnels in a way that's not sinister. It's like, yeah, there was just some tunnels underneath their house and they were just using it to help the neighbors.
I
No,
mean,
it's always something evil.
mass transit systems. You hear about
Yeah.
tunnels in a
Oh,
positive,
fair. Okay, yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
but that's the only example I could think of.
yeah. You never hear of non-public tunnels being used in a non-sinister way. Maybe that's a better way of.
Yeah, and
Like
I think
secret tunnels, it's for something bad.
and one of the things that I've been kind of kicking around in my mind about the idea of like subterranean stuff, and a lot of it being in California, is we don't have basements, right? Like here in
Mm,
California, there are basements, but houses tend not to have them. Mostly earthquake, right? You can see where
mhm,
maybe you don't build a basement if the earth might start shaking violently. The whole then instead of just your roof falling on you, well, the whole first floor actually falls on you and whatever
yeah.
structure was supporting the basement. So I think that might it's not the whole reason, but it certainly seems that outside of the tunnels in New York City or whatever, that most of the time when people were talking about the tunnels,
Mhm,
that it was in California. Because if you remember, the Comet Ping Pong was about a basement and not the tunnels, and I think there's something there with like they're not people not spending time in a subterranean environment in California is why
mm.
a lot of this stuff maybe came out of California.
Interesting. Yeah, because I think with the New York ones, it wasn't even a tunnel system. It was just like a small room they dug under the place.
Yeah, yeah. Again, don't do that.
Yeah. No, I still don't do it. But again, it's how quickly the misinformation spread because everyone assumes it's like, yeah, what was the other one? It was like there was like a story about how it was a tunnel leading from the synagogue to like a stand or something outside on like the next block over or something. I forget what it was, but it's like they were like this theory was that they were walking to this like newsstand or whatever, and then the tunnel entrance was behind it, and then they were entering there and sneaking in, and then it's like the reality is nowhere near as extravagant. It's just a small little like 8 foot long room.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that story, I'm like, no, I'm not even gonna fuck with this. I'm like, I'm like, I don't even care what people are saying about this because I read a news story about it and I was like, oh, this is they're just building a room or something subterranean that they shouldn't be
Mhm.
building because they might die down there. Like,
I need.
and if you think about it, during the Cold War, like a lot of people had bunkers and were
Mhm.
preparing for the nuclear holocaust or
You
whatever.
mean tunnel systems to do
I'm sorry,
nefarious
tunnel. You're
acts?
right. They were tunnel systems. They'd take you the tunnel to freedom. The
This
tunnel
is
to
my
freedom.
4 foot by 4 foot tunnel system.
Yeah.
It's filled with food and supplies.
But there is like something, you think about it, like there is something maybe with within our psychology or whatever that, you know, being under the surface of the earth, we might be it's going to be hidden, right? And
Hmm.
so it's something hidden, and so people are going to map a bunch of stuff onto that.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's interesting where people's minds go whenever specific things get brought up. Um,
I mean, there's also a financial incentive here, right, for content creators or,
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
and some of it's a grift, right? Like it can't not,
Hmm.
it's impossible for none of it to be a grift.
I don't know. I feel like people wouldn't go on the internet and lie for money. That just it seems like that'd be wrong.
I go on the internet and try to tell people I'm interesting and I make money on it. So I think I just disagree with you.
You know, and that's just that's an opinion. I'm just gonna leave it out there. But one of the things I wanted to touch on before we wrap is there like a specific how do I word this? Obviously, there's a lot of like conspiracies that kind of get wedged into current day topics. The New York tunnel system. I'm doing air quotes, for example. How would you suggest people combat this sort of misinformation and borderline conspiracy theories as they're trolling the internet for actual information?
So if you're trying to look for accurate information, the unfortunate thing that nobody's going to want to hear is you should
Go
probably
to
just
Twitter.
seek it out from legacy news sources. It's, people don't want to hear this, but like, you may not like the New York Times or even the Wall Street Journal or whatever, but they they're they have a long history of being pretty accurate when they're doing like fact-based reporting.
Mm.
And that oftentimes means you have to wait, right? When something breaks, and if you really want to know what's going on, wait.
I mean, true. everyone tries to figure out the truth of the matter immediately. You see it a lot of times during, unfortunately, because it happens so often, shootings where, especially on social media, it's like, this is who the shooter was, this is how they identified, and race and gender and sexual orientation, all that. When in reality, it's like, this is a person that hurt people. None of that's really relevant. But
So it's not really necessarily the funniest story in the world, but after Parkland, Infowars had shared a picture of a guy that they were claiming was the shooter,
mm,
and coincidentally, there was this woman named Julie Borowski that we had been kind of making fun of, but she was like natured about it. There was this guy Chess Strongwell that was kind of making fun of her. Obviously, that's not his name. But then she started being like, "Oh, my boyfriend Chess just has some weird ideas about." She was kind of a good sport about it, and we all ended up being kind of friendly online, actually. And the reason we all ended up being friendly online is when this guy's picture was spread around, this Julie lady, and I didn't even, we'd been making fun of her on Facebook for like, she was like a weird libertarian that we thought was comical to make fun of. But
mhm.
she was like, "Hey, that's not the shooter. He doesn't live in Florida. He's my neighbor." She's like, "I know him, and you're putting his life in danger. You need to shut the fuck up."
Yeah.
And then I hit her up, and I was like, "Hey, thank you for doing that. I know we've been making fun of you on Facebook." She's like, "Oh, you're one of those goat trolls." And I'm like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You guys are pretty funny, actually." She's like, "I never took any of it too seriously." And I was like, "Well, hey, you know, this is a few years ago we kind of stopped making fun of you, but I'm like, you really did the right thing here, and I'm glad you did." She's like, "Well, that's my neighbor, and I know him." She's like, "So I would do nothing else." She's like, "You would do the same thing." And so that guy ended up suing Infowars, and then unfortunately, like unrelated to all this, he passed away in an
Mm.
accident at work. But that's why the story isn't funny. Um, but it's interesting the way these things play out, and that lady Julie that we'd been making fun of actually just put the brakes on this stuff. Like,
Mm.
whereas this guy probably would have been relentlessly harassed.
Yeah. It's
And
interesting to see how people react to situations like that, because I think something similar happened with the Boston Marathon bombing, where
yep,
people knew the people involved, the two brothers, and they're like, "Oh, it wouldn't be them." Like, I think they went to the same synagogue or whatever, and it's like, no, they recognized them from the video, like, wow, clearly it's not them because we know them, and they just didn't do anything. I mean, not sitting here blaming them or anything, but it's like, I can understand. It's like, oh, I know that person. Of course, it's not them. It's just someone that looks like them. And it's, well, you've that, and then you also have Reddit and similar online communities. Like, we found them, and it's just some poor random person who happened to be standing nearby or whatever. Like, this person sat down here, or this person, walked into the place this time, and it can quickly spiral out of control as online sleuths think they've figured everything out, and then they quickly hunt down and dox poor innocent random people who just happen to be in the vicinity.
yeah, and that's why, like, if there's like if there's some event that happens like on a day that I stream, I might mention it in passing and just be like, I don't have we don't have any reliable information on this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to hold off on this, and I would suggest that you do too.
Yeah.
And at first people were like, "Well, oh, this might have to do with this conspiracy stuff, and you know a lot about it." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I don't know anything about the event." I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"This is just unfolding." And so, it would, now I'm the conspiracy theorist if I start shooting my mouth off about what I think happened here.
Especially in scenarios like that, like if it's one lone individual, you can kind of piece together what's happened to an extent fairly quickly. But like for situations like the Boston Marathon, it's like, it's such a complex scenario. There's so many people involved. The idea that, like, oh, we figured it all out within like minutes, hours, whatever, is insane. And
It's
like, I know,
irresponsible.
yeah,
Even if you end up being right some of the time, you're going to be wrong some of the time. And,
yeah,
not only, okay, you're giving out the information of somebody who didn't do it. That's pretty bad, especially if you have a big audience. But then
correct me if, okay,
you're like meddling in the lives in some ways of like the families and the loved ones and people involved who maybe weren't, harmed or whatever, but you're now,
mhm,
sort of digitally and virtually meddling in their life in a way. And it's like, I don't know, it when an event unfolds, and I should probably actually, maybe I should, after this article I'm working on now, I should put this down. Like, you should, like, people need to ask themselves a few questions. The first
Yeah.
question is, what if I wait?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if I wait? What happens if I wait to decide what happened? And then, like, who is telling me, or where am I getting information about what happened? And what, if anything, did they say the last time something similar or tangentially related happened? And were they right? You
Yeah.
know, what is my bias toward here? And am I just indulging my own biases when I'm trying to decide what happened? Um, and what are the consequences to my own reputation, maybe if I'm a content creator, or to society more broadly if I'm sharing a false or incomplete narrative? Like,
Mm.
these are questions that some of them are apply to content creators, but some of them just reply to some random person, has a few thousand followers and might retweet something, and then you find out it's wrong. You're like, well, I don't know, I just retweeted somebody else, and it's like, well, so did a bunch of other people, you asshole.
Yeah. I was gonna say, correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't they initially accuse the police or FBI or whoever? Didn't they initially accuse the wrong person for the Boston Marathon bombing? I thought they like had an actual suspect that the local news or whatever got a hold of, and they were like, the guy was on TV, and they're like, oh, this is the guy, and then it obviously turned out not to be him. I could be thinking of a different case, but I thought it was that one.
I think so too. I think they held someone, but and it's odd in this case, but it's maybe not so odd. I think that this person, and I'm just going off of memory here, so I'm not sure if this is going to
Yeah.
be 100% accurate. I think this person was detained by the FBI, and actually the FBI figured out pretty quickly that they had the wrong person. There's a fuck the police and all that, but there's a reason that the FBI and the federal government and the DOJ have such a high conviction rate. It's because they get the person. And if you're not the person, they're
Mhm.
probably going to figure it out. Like, going back to the Satanic Panic, I'll sometime in about the mid 80s, the FBI was actually going around and telling these local police departments to stop it, that you're not going to solve these crimes by assuming that these that the weird kids at the school are in a satanic cult and are did this as a ritual. This is probably just crime, which is a little bit
Yeah.
odd because the FBI has a long history of oppressing the outcasts in our society, right?
Hmm. Well,
So,
there
oh,
was a
god.
guy that I think committed suicide as well that they misidentified as like being one of the Boston Marathon bombers. Uh, Sunil Tripathi. I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation of that.
Yeah.
He had committed suicide, and then they like Reddit was like, "Oh, this is the guy here," but he had already passed away before the Boston Marathon bombing even occurred.
And not for nothing, all a lot of the same people, like the media figures, and the obvious one that everybody's going to know is Infowars, Alex Jones.
Mhm.
The ones who are immediately sure they know who did it, like, fucking without fail, 48 hours later, are saying that it was the event didn't happen, or that it was a false flag, or that it was staged. And it's like, but weren't you saying yesterday that you knew who did it? And it was probably because, you find the nearest Muslim or whatever, if it's a bomb, I suppose. And it's like, well, which is it now? Like,
Mhm.
did you super sleuth the bomber, or was this all like staged by the FBI to, I don't know, take my grenade out of my cold dead hands or whatever? It's like, it almost doesn't matter to some extent if mis the misinformation that comes out around it is contradictory, because people are so invested in remember when you were a kid, you're like, I know something you don't know.
Mhm.
It was that you feel like you're smart, or like you've cracked the code or whatever. Because, yeah, kids will do that all the time. I know something you don't know,
I
and
mean,
I'm not
that's
going to
I
tell
feel like
you.
that's how a lot of people get into these fringe conspiracies. Is like, oh, we're in the know now.
Yeah, and it's like, well, nobody knows shit actually. People, like, people may know things, but we all know like you had said, you're pretty good at online marketing and whatever. You may be an expert in that, but
I'm not an
um,
expert, but I do it for a living.
well, you're a professional then.
Sure.
Um, and like the things I think I have a pretty firm grasp on um, high demand, high control groups, and how online communities form around nefarious or false ideas. And maybe on top of that, I haven't done it in a while, but I'm a fairly competent Linux systems administrator, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but that's it. Like, I'm a shitty video editor. Oh, I'm pretty good DJ too. I can rock the discotheque. I still play raves occasionally, though I feel a little old there. But I'm not like somebody's like, oh, you cover the news. Tell me about this thing. I'm like, go find somebody who knows about this thing. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know.
There's a lot of especially with the rise of like social media surrounding politics and like during the COVID uh, pandemic, there's a lot of people who worked very like plumbers that suddenly became medical experts because of reading Facebook comments and things of that nature. All of a sudden, all these people who work at McDonald's are suddenly foreign diplomat, you know, experts. It's like, oh, you studied foreign affairs? Like, no, but I read a Facebook comment, so I'm pretty in the know now.
Yeah,
Like that sort of thing.
it's pretty crazy actually because the stuff we cover is pretty fringe, but you know, I end up essentially shilling for like the expert consensus on things because I don't know. So I'm like, well, what do virologists and infectious disease specialists and public health administrators say about this?
Yeah.
They're not going to get everything right every time, and they have decisions to make maybe where I would maybe err on the side of caution or alarmism where they would err the other way. But
Mhm.
it's like, and you had mentioned a plumber. It's like that's a thing I actually bring up. Every
Yeah.
once in a while I'll get somebody who joins my
Not to shit
Discord
on
voice.
plumbers in particular. It's just the first, job I could think of that wasn't an expert in virology.
Well, but what I'm saying is like,
Yeah.
I sometimes I'll get somebody like join my Discord voice. They'll be like a conspiracy theorist. It happened more during COVID. They'll start popping off at the mouth, and they'll be like, "Oh, the experts are all wrong. The experts are all wrong." And I'm like, you know what? If your toilet started going the other way and shit was all over your bathroom floor because your toilet was going the other way, would you call a plumber or would you do your own research?
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, I'd call a plumber." And I'm like, "Well, how is this any different?" The only
Mhm.
difference is that that one smells really bad, and then it might get into your carpet if you have carpet. Now your carpet smells like feces. And so it's a bit more of an emergency that's happening right now to you, and you
Mhm.
need to get this fixed. Whereas, a disease is sort of, you can't see it.
Yeah.
And it's not, you don't currently have it. Or if you do, maybe you're asymptomatic or whatever. And so it's like why would you trust the plumber but not the infectious disease specialist? And the
Mhm.
answer is usually like, well, the plumbers aren't paid off. And I'm like, maybe the plumber's in a union. You don't know if the union is stepping on them to use a certain kind of pipe or whatever to
Yeah.
fix your toilet when there's a better pipe out there. You don't know any of that. But what you want is the fucking toilet to start flowing the right way so that shit doesn't stops coming onto the floor of your bathroom. And it's just really weird how when it's like medical stuff, a
Yeah.
lot of times people will, for whatever reason, you know,
Mhm.
not call the plumber essentially.
The last thing I wanted to touch on before we wrap is in the same sense of things of like how people allow these sort of conspiracies to overrule things that they already should know. And the example I'll give is like I had family members during COVID who worked it, they were nurses. Like I had my one aunt was a nurse and she didn't believe in any of the science behind COVID and then she started denying other vaccines. And to me that didn't make sense on like a basic level of like, well, you studied all this in school, so like you believed in it then. How do you not believe in it now? How like I don't understand like the backtracking and overwriting of like things you've already come to understand and it makes sense. And then also like, well, how do you do your job? Like you don't if you don't trust the science behind like what you're doing, how are you going to work and doing it? Like you'd think you wouldn't. Like it doesn't add up to me.
So I have to imagine there's a good bit of compartmentalization going on there.
Mhm.
And, in an example like that, we don't, I don't know if there were other, other, situations where this person was going to, or has previously, like, sort of abandoned the idea of expert consensus in favor of a conspiracy theory. Maybe that person
Didn't
previously
seem like
believed,
it to me, just
well,
for
maybe,
input.
maybe that
But
person
I get what you're saying.
previously
Yeah.
maybe that person previously believed in chemtrails but never brought it up around you
Mhm.
because there wasn't, like, it didn't seem urgent to them or whatever.
Yeah.
Maybe they previously believed the moon landing was a hoax and didn't bring it
Mhm.
up because it didn't seem urgent, because, like, if the moon landing is a hoax, we're not all going to die, right?
Yeah.
It's fairly low stakes. Maybe they believe in Bigfoot. Hell, I want to believe in Bigfoot. That'd be pretty cool. um
Mhm.
so we don't know necessarily, unless we have conversations about, you know conspiracism and issues that people believe in those things around. We don't know. And it
Yeah.
could just be, and it's maybe a little trite or whatever, it could just be that COVID melted some people's fucking brains.
Like I said, it seems like a lot of those just sprouted up based on political ideology to a certain extent. Because, like I said, these people were, I don't know how you want to explain it, but like perfectly fine with vaccines beforehand. It's like, oh, these kids not getting, their flu shots or whatever, just anything you can think of, like general basic what we would consider the normal vaccines that kids used to get before going to school. Totally on board with that. They would complain when these kids didn't have it. COVID comes around and all of a sudden, you know, vaccines cause autism, all the old, you know, sticking points for people that are against the COVID vaccine and then other vaccines, I suppose.
So
And
the example
it
of a
just,
nurse is probably a little weird because they were working maybe more than
yeah.
other people, but I think that for a lot of people, they were stuck at home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit easier to go down a rabbit hole if you're by
Yeah.
yourself. If you don't, like, I lived alone at the
Mm-hmm.
time when that hit. Um, my last roommate had just moved out, and I mean, I would do things like meet at the park and smoke a joint or whatever, but we weren't hanging out inside, and we were doing that kind of rarely, right? Because it's kind of a pain in the ass, and it's technically illegal to smoke a joint in the park, even though, well, weed is legal. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, though I think maybe the police would exercise discretion and just leave us alone in that case, especially when I lived in a upper middle place, uh, upper middle class place like Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
There
I
was
appreciate, side note, I appreciate when police use common sense judgment in a lot of instances.
instead of shooting your dog.
It's literally exactly what I'm referring to because we have I go across town. And there's a town park, no pets allowed, which I get. You don't want dogs like pooping in the park where kids are playing, whatever. But like the cops will drive by. Usually when I'm out there, like I go out late at night and I'm walking the dog, and I only take him down there when it's late, like 11, 12 o'clock at night, and they can see me walking him. No one's around. They can see that I have like bags to clean up after him or whatever. They're not harassing me about it because they can just look at me and be like, okay, clearly he's being responsible enough about it. And I appreciate that they do that instead of being sticklers for the rules.
So you ever wonder if you were someone else, maybe that might play out differently?
I can see that being the case, especially based on where I live and the some of the dialogue of the locals, if you want to word it
Yeah,
very
yeah.
politely.
So yeah, I don't want to get in too much into policing. We
Yeah.
talk about that some on the show, but basically, like, that's a big problem. And there's, it's strangely enough, it's you would have thought it would have gone. Speaking of conspiracy theories, you would have thought it would have gone the other way. Cops generally being like authoritarian, you'd have thought that they
Mm.
would have just um, like fallen in line and been um, kind of shitty to people that refuse to wear masks. But it turned out that, like, um, law enforcement was more likely to refuse or to try to refuse vaccination and try to refuse masking than than other professions, and that,
Mm.
it's kind of counterintuitive in a way, um, because you're like, well, your job is ostensibly to like enforce the rules, and here you
Mhm.
are saying fuck the rules. So
Right.
it's, you the the one thing that I think might be good about the rise of conspiracism during COVID is that it disabused people of the notion that they know what a conspiracy theorist looks like, or know what
Mm.
kind of job they might have, or
Makes sense.
you, oh, before you'd think of a conspiracy theorist, right, and you'd think of, like, I don't know if you've seen the X-Files, but you think of like the lone gunman from the X-Files
Mhm.
or whatever. You would think of, it was usually a man. He was usually, maybe mid 30s or whatever. He'd, long hair, sort of looks like a hippie, you
Yeah.
know, and it just disabused everybody of that, because now, like, now you find out that the upper middle class lady down the street who's like a stockbroker and goes to the yoga studio, she believes in QAnon, and it's like, what the fuck? You're not supposed to believe in QAnon.
Yeah.
It's like, so I think that like opened up a lot of people's eyes to the fact that we can't really just sort of spot someone who might believe these things. And I think
Mm.
that, as unfortunate as some of that ended up being, I think it actually is good, and it sort of alerted people to the fact that people in their lives could go down these sorts of rabbit holes. And you had mentioned, and maybe a good place for us to leave off here is, you'd asked, like, how we stop the spread of misinformation, and
Mhm.
I think
Just turn off the internet.
well, I think the
Talk to people.
best thing you can do is, make sure you check in on your people, see how
Mhm.
they're doing, that kind of stuff, because you're gonna, you don't need to argue with them about their conspiracy theory, but if they know that you don't believe it, and you're the one checking in on the uncle who's sort of isolated or whatever, they're, you're much more likely to maybe pull that person in a less extreme direction, just by being
Mhm.
there for them when, like, they're fairly isolated or whatever. But
It's not even pulling them away from the conspiracy theory. In some instances, it's just keeping them from being completely isolated alone with their thoughts. Just be
yeah,
like, hey, there's a world out here. You can interact with it. You don't
yeah,
have to sit in your chat room or whatever.
it's become a meme, but it's like,
Mhm.
encourage them to touch a little grass every once in a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. But yeah, I've digressed enough. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. I had a great time chatting about all this. I'd love to do this again sometime. It's always fun. We've had a number of conspiracy theory, cult sort of adjacent guests on before, but I feel like we went a slightly different route this time, and I really appreciated that. More of the psychology behind it to an extent, and the growth of it, as opposed to goofing on cults and theories.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
I do plenty of that, but
Yeah.
I'm not gonna I'm not coming on somebody else's show to do that.
That's
I don't want to encourage the competition.
no, but I do appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can everybody go to check out all your stuff?
So my website's echoplexmedia.com. You can find everything there. There should be links in this podcast show notes. If you want to watch us live, that's twitch.tv/echoplexmedia. And if you'd like to buy some pretty cool conspiracy theory related swag, in addition to other kind of cool stuff, you can go to eplex.store. And again, shout out to Fourth Wall. They're the best merch provider. And if anybody's interested in joining Fourth Wall, I'm a partner over there. So, hit me up and I can get you a join link that gets you some perks and gets me a little sample credit so I can buy even more of my own swag.
Nice. Do your hats keep out the 5G?
No, but there's a guy we make fun of who makes those kinds of things, and he charges $150 for a baseball hat. I am wearing a tinfoil hat right now, but it's just a
I
hat
I
from
know
my
your
shop.
products say tinfoil on the tinfoil
Yeah,
hats.
yeah,
That's why I asked.
yeah. Yeah, they're not 5G proof because they're only $25. The 5G proof ones are probably the same hat I'm wearing, but they charge $125.
Ah, I need to get the 5G repellent sneakers. Charge like $400 for them.
This one guy has a nightgown.
I you know I shout out to him for trying a different product. I never would have thought to sell nightgowns.
Oh, and a little black dress too on his site. It's crazy. He, as if you could imagine, he not a big fan of me or us or whatever, because we've been making fun of him for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been a lot of fun, and you know, if your audience is interested, we're still small enough that we're pretty accessible. And if you want to join our Discord server, that's at discord.me/Echoplex. And I still take DMs for the time being, though. That's looking at my alerts right now. It's starting to feel like maybe that those days are going to come to an end soon.
Fair enough. Yeah, thank you again for coming on. Everyone, go check out all of their stuff. Echoplex Media. Thank you so much. Had a great time. Go check out deadjustproductions.live. Got all of our links on there. And this has been episode 215. Thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.